This is my 4th year participating in the ISPCS. My first year, though, as a member of CASIS. And I think if there is any take-home message today, yes, I am here today because CASIS is not the government. In fact, we're an NGO, so I think that's an important thing that we'll get across today. Before I get started with my discussion on commercial application of the ISS, we have just a brief video that we want to show that kind of gives a 101, if you will, overview of what the intended mission of CASIS is and where we are with respect to today, and hopefully where we'll be going in the future. So if you can go ahead and start that video, thanks.
What is CASIS? CASIS is the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, and it manages the National Laboratory on the International Space Station. CASIS is launching a new era of space research to help reduce cost, increasing access and opportunity. CASIS is your gateway to innovation, breakthroughs, commercial R&D research, giving scientific, commercial, and educational industries equal access to space. For the betterment of humankind. CASIS is appointed by Congress to identify the opportunities for the International Space Station, to take advantage of its unique environments to generate a return on investments, not only financially, but to improve life on Earth as well for the citizens of the United States. We do this by breaking down barriers, assisting in research, connecting, hardware, and funding. CASIS, bringing home the magic of space.
So not as exciting as the smoke and fire that comes from the SpaceX videos, but nonetheless, hopefully a primer to what I have the fortune of talking about right before lunch. Thanks, Pat. I think this is always the best speaking slot, right? So the concept of a national laboratory, which enables access to a research institution which has a really unique set of expertise, qualifications, and equipment, therefore, is not a novel concept with respect to the ISS. In fact, it's probably a couple of decades old. There have been starts and stops with this concept through different presidential administrations. I think there had been a little more ebb than flow, but nonetheless, there are a couple of key critical milestones that have happened over the last few years that were important to establish the designation of an entity such as CASIS moving forward. That began in 2005 with congressional authorization that formally dedicated the U.S. portion of the International Space Station as a national laboratory. And if you think back, this was well before the construction of the ISS was complete. So to have that forethought and that idea that this is going to be a laboratory, a research platform for technology development and for science breakthrough that will exceed the capacity that NASA may have for its exploration mission was rather unique. And so it was a key designation that really kind of set the seed firmly to move forward. In 2010, the president also signed the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 into law, and that really did two key things for us. One, it extended the ISS operations at least until 2020. And if you think about that, that was really important. Here we are in 2010, again, construction not complete or just really nearing construction complete, and not much of an understanding of, okay, it's built, now what do we do with it? And so to have the foresight to at least extend it through 2020 to demonstrate some very fundamental application was key. I will argue, however, that the station, the ISS as we know it, certainly needs to extend much further than 2020. We understand its operational lifetime can go well beyond 2028. But whenever, and when it does deorbit, it does have an operational lifetime, the concept of a low Earth orbit laboratory research platform is something that I believe really should continue. So this is really another key milestone in establishing a national lab entity or opportunity, if you will, in such a unique environment. The other key milestone in that Authorization Act was a direction to NASA to establish a non-government entity or a non-government organization to actually assume management of the laboratory. Now, there's probably a lot of different opinions as to why that was driven, and clearly politics and bureaucracy are a part of it. But I think it was a really good decision, because what it did was it allowed NASA, one, to focus on their mission, which was completely independent of what the concept of the national laboratory would be. And it also allowed a non-government entity to do things that, quite frankly, a government agency can't do, and that is to interact with commercial users, other government agencies to some degree, and academic institutions that focus on the development of technology and transfer into the marketplace, and create an opportunity for others to use this facility. So in 2011, NASA issued a cooperative agreement notice, so it was a competitive bid, if you will, for the management of the National Laboratory. If I recall correctly, there were 4 organizations that came together and created a proposal, if you will, on how they would conduct this opportunity. And CASIS, fortunately, was selected in July of that year. After some negotiations and kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, we were able to begin formal operations in August 31st of 2011. So really, we've just celebrated our 2nd birthday not too long ago. So what is the CASIS structure? And again, this is really important. We have 3 primary elements that reside within our mission. And I think each and every one of them really deserves some bit of discussion. One, so that this community that's here today can understand clearly what it is about CASIS, how we are different, and what it is that we're chartered to do. But first and foremost, we are chartered to develop and manage a diverse research and development portfolio, not just science. And I really can't stress that enough. In fact, I've argued on a number of occasions that our name should change, because I think there's been too much emphasis on the use of the ISS as a research laboratory for science only, yet we understand from our initial commercial market analyses that technology development, technology demonstration, and other types of uses of ISS are certainly quite credible. But nonetheless, it's our responsibility to understand and develop and manage this portfolio that is diverse. And diverse in another way also, and that is incorporating basic and fundamental research along with applied research. So addressing every point along the continuum of science discovery, maturity, and enhancement. But to really focus on 2 things, and this is really kind of the key take home here. One is understand what the U.S. national needs are. Not what NASA's exploration needs are for the use of a microgravity environment, but more importantly, what is it that our national interests and needs are in order to better ourselves with respect to science endeavor, technology advancement, and education for that matter. And to match that very closely and clearly with what the actual capabilities of the International Space Station are. And I would argue this latter one has probably been more of the challenge for us than the former. And that is, if you think about the International Space Station, its design, its concept goes back several decades. Its construction was over 10 years, and so you have kind of a technology slowdown, if you will, where technology has advanced as we know it here on the ground, yet what has been put in place with respect to developing the International Space Station based on the design requirements, they've kind of lagged. And so understanding what the capabilities are today and how they translate to the U.S. national interests and the market analyses and needs are something that we've really been focused on in our first 2 years. Because by doing that, then you can understand where it is that you need to target with respect to your utilization of your customers. Our second major element of responsibility is to stimulate and manage the use of the International Space Station by other government agencies, by academic institutions and consortiums that are focused around higher learning, and probably most importantly by commercial entities. And to say commercial entities really is a very broad term. It does include both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, companies, but what it probably more fairly represents are the non-government entities that have a use for a very unique research platform in which their key driver is the development of either tangible or intangible value that can be sold or exchanged on the open marketplace. But I do emphasize, again, that one of the key structures to CASIS was to also be of service to other government agencies. We know that agencies such as NOAA, such as NIH, for example, have within their research portfolios an interest in conducting research in microgravity. This, again, has sort of ebbed and flowed with respect to budgetary restrictions over the last few years. But nonetheless, there was a committee established by the Office of Science and Technology and Policy out of the White House that brought together 6 government, basically funding organizations to understand, particularly within the life sciences and biotech community, what is it that they were interested in with respect to microgravity research, and what would their needs be, and what were their constraints. And so we understand now, as being a sort of conduit, if you will, to access to the International Space Station, that yea, verily, there are other government agencies who still do have an interest. And I think as we move forward, some of our challenges will be, how do we work with these other government agencies to understand the science initiatives that they have, how they can be evaluated properly and prioritized for research, and how well their funding lines up with what the actual costs of utilization are. Academic institutions equally are important, and I'll talk about this a little bit more as I describe some of our novel as well as non-traditional business development efforts that CASIS conducts in order to stimulate business opportunities. But I will say at this point, having a very strong academic base where technology development and then transfer in the marketplace is one of the key elements of that academic base is absolutely crucial to bringing in new users to a platform that may have not have been contemplated in the past. And then finally, commercial application is at the crux of the success of the International Space Station. Whether we like it or not, or believe it's the appropriate basis for arguing the existence and continued presence of the International Space Station, it is what it is. And on the Hill and within NASA, this is one of our primary drivers and one of the biggest metrics that we are being held to demonstrate a true use of such a significant investment that's been made over several years. Our third major priority that is well written into our mission and our goal through our cooperative agreement with NASA and being driven by Congress is to communicate the value of the International Space Station. And again, this has a multitude of definitions. First and foremost, it's to promote awareness. Many of us, all of us in this room, are obviously very much aware of the space program. We know that when the shuttle flew out and retired, that the International Space Station was still on orbit. We know that there are 6 crew members who are currently habitating the space station and have been doing so for a number of years. But outside of this room, when we go out into the general public and we survey folks off the street, this is not common knowledge. And it's really something that we need to focus on to promote a general awareness of a U.S. technology that is absolutely incredible and on the forefront of our technological capabilities. More importantly, though, that general awareness also needs to be supplemented with a targeted outreach campaign, Business 101 or marketing, whatever you want to call it, but that enabling opportunity for us to go to a commercial entity, to an industry, to a market sector, and actually educate them on the capabilities that this research platform provides. Because I can guarantee you, when they develop their 10 and 15-year research and development budgets and portfolios and sort of pathways, the ISS is never really in that model. And so that also falls in line with our third charter, which is communicating the value of the International Space Station. And then finally, I think a large part of the communication element, and again, I will argue there are many, will be conducting both formal education along the areas of STEM as well as informal education, where we can highlight the capabilities that occur and be able to use that in fostering advocacy for the extension of the International Space Station as well as research in low Earth orbit going forward and well beyond the International Space Station. And so I will point out that as a partner of NASA, and we clearly are partners, we do receive $15 million each year from NASA, but as a nonprofit, a 501c3, again, more importantly, a non-government entity, we actually have the ability to generate other sources of revenue. And we can do that in a number of ways. I'll talk about this a little bit more as I get into this discussion, but really what we have found to be successful to date is our ability to identify partnerships where we can leverage both financial resources as well as technical capabilities to have a better opportunity to attract a user base That helps with our brand. It helps with our ability to leverage the offsetting of costs that are necessary for conducting the still very important and critical fundamental research that needs to be done in order to establish and really understand what the capabilities of ISS are. But it also helps us break into markets or emerging markets where, again, this thought of using such a hard to contemplate research platform is rather difficult. The other great benefit that we have with our partnership with NASA is that they provide all of our transportation logistics as well as all of our on-orbit support. So this is a fully subsidized opportunity that CASIS has at its disposal. There are many ways to kind of decipher what this relationship means. I think if you look at the 2010 authorization bill and law, as well as the cooperative agreement language that I think is publicly available, there's this discussion about CASIS having access to 50% of all of the capabilities of the International Space Station U.S. portion. You can slice that and dice it any way you want, but what it really means is that we have the opportunity to take advantage of the International Space Station, everything from launch opportunities to on-orbit resources, including crew time, access to the crew, collection of data and sending that data down in real time, return of payloads on the SpaceX Dragon, et cetera, et cetera. And we share in all of those assets. But the good news is that our cost is covered by NASA. So it's really a wonderful opportunity. And so this is what has created the new opportunity going forward. And so I'll highlight a few things as I go further into the discussion. But number one, the establishment of CASIS, an NGO to manage a national laboratory model on the International Space Station, overnight opens up access for U.S. interests to both the internal as well as the external facilities and the platforms of the International Space Station. It's not to say that commercial entities didn't have access to station and shuttle flights in the past, but many of you who are investigators and PIs know and understand very well, and quite frankly, very painfully, it was certainly not an easy endeavor. And so this is an opportunity now in which sort of the pains of the past were recognized, and the solutions were instilled both in law and with support of our partnership with NASA to actually open up access to the commercial user. I mentioned this earlier, but we do. We have 50% of the available U.S. launch and on-orbit resources at our disposal. And again, there's no firm definition on really what that means. And through our partnership with NASA and working with the ISS National Lab Office out of JSC, as well as our headquarters colleagues in DC, we have had nothing but tremendous success with communicating our requirements that our customers have and being able to leverage these resources in order to have successful missions and payloads flown to ISS. So we continue to both agree that this concept of 50% should remain fluid and dynamic and take full opportunity of it as we go forward. Again, the costs associated with launch and on-orbit operations are fully subsidized. And equally as important, we have access to implementation partners. These are payload integrators, payload developers of the past who have significant legacy knowledge, expertise, and a history of developing very complicated payloads in order to preserve the science objectives but enable a successful mission at the end of the day. Instead of recreating the wheel or that knowledge base, if you will, we've partnered with them and have sort of brought them into the larger CASIS organization to make them available to users of the ISS. But in doing so, we've also created more of a competitive marketplace where in the days of the past where there was one payload developer who had one specific expertise on one piece of hardware, we now have implementation partners who actually have a much more diverse workforce and skill set that can support a multitude of different platforms and hardware facilities on orbit. And that inherently creates a competitive marketplace with respect to cost and value in obtaining those services. We have access to ground facilities and equipment through our partnership with NASA. One of the reasons CASIS is headquartered near the Kennedy Space Center harkens back into the days of shuttle, where there was a lot of facilities that were built in order to foster the development of payload and research that was necessary to sort of demonstrate your payload verification and demonstrate your science verification and have absolute assuredness that the investment that you were putting into your spaceflight research was going to be successful to the best of your ability. And so those facilities still exist today. And part of our partnership, both with Space Florida as well as NASA, is to take full advantage of those resources and make them available to the new users. That also goes along with subject matter expertise. While I mentioned earlier we have access to our implementation partners, and that really is more of a business partnership that we've created, we also have access to NASA subject matter expertise. And so we're able to tap back into all of the different centers across the agency and utilize them for understanding the capabilities as well as the constraints that ISS facilities and hardware provide, and hopefully be able to use that in partnership with our own science expertise and business development people who know how to kind of convert the language of NASAese, if you will, into a business speak. And so I think John mentioned earlier in his talk that it's extremely important to have a diversity, if you will, of a team in order to be successful in whatever you're going after. We see that in this opportunity as well. When we create when we identify an opportunity, if you will, that we want to target on with the hopes of creating a business development, ultimately use of ISS at the end of the day, we assemble a team that will go out and approach that potential customer. And it includes not just a business development-minded person, but also someone with science and technology expertise, and as needed, reach back to folks within NASA and other organizations who can help us with understanding very complicated technical assets and capabilities, as well as requirements on ISS. So with all of that, this is CASIS's value proposition. We are very fortunate to be in the position that we are, and we are capitalizing on that good fortune that's been provided to us. And in doing so, when we try to interest a new user in the utilization of ISS, this is kind of our take-home message, if you will. Comparatively speaking, with respect to use of ISS or low Earth orbit research in the past, this is a significantly reduced cost. Again, I mentioned that the cost of launch and the cost of on-orbit resources are 100% subsidized. So again, there's many models out there, there's many calculations that have been done that would suggest a per kilogram cost per launch, all of the resources on orbit, which translate to some crazy number, I think, of $50,000 an hour. Those are all covered through our relationship with NASA. The element of reduced burden is one in which we see ourselves as almost a sort of a white glove service provider, where we recognize that there is still some level of effort that needs to be put in place in order for a science or technology development or a project to be vetted enough so that the safety and the integrity of the crew, as well as the vehicle, are taken into account. And that does require testing. It requires certification and a very keen understanding of what it is that you want to use this research platform for. But nonetheless, we see this as an opportunity for us as CASIS to work with our partners, as well as maybe even doing some of the effort ourselves internally to sort of reduce the burden on these newfound customers. You want to always knock down any of the barriers or the inhibitory factors that exist within any new business deal or acquisition. And this is one element that we take a look at as being opportunistic for us. Resource availability is just as I mentioned in the past. We have access to established ground facilities and equipment. We have access to implementation partners, all of the hardware and all the facilities that are available both on the ground and on ISS. And again, that includes both the external facilities as well as internal. And we have commercial access. And again, we feel that this is a really important element that goes into the CASIS model. At the end of the day, what we will be graded on is, did we return an investment on the establishment of the International Space Station? It was built and paid for by taxpayer dollars. But can we demonstrate that either through tangible or intangible value, that there has been some creation of benefit that has been driven back to terrestrial interests? And so by partnering with commercial entities where, again, their whole drive is to create a product, to create IP, or to create some other knowledge enhancement that can be put into the marketplace and sold either for profit or for opportunity is one where we see opportunistic for CASIS. So within our 2 years, this is kind of just a little snapshot of what the national lab utilization has looked like to date. I'm proud to say, and I'm happy to say, that there actually has been commercial utilization, as well as utilization from our OGA partners, other government agencies, and academic institutions. And I think actually I could probably update this slide, but to keep it as objective as I can, I'll stick with these numbers. But to date, CASIS has obligated over $15 million towards ISS National Lab research. And this actually cuts across more than 40 flight projects. That in itself sounds good. I mean, again, if you think about it, $15 million within less than 2 years to be obligated and to have 40 projects manifested for flight is pretty aggressive. What has typically been a 36-month window from concept to flight is something that we're really, really aggressively working on to reduce. Some of these projects have had the opportunity to fly within 6 to 9 months, and so that's a model that we want to continue to hammer on. But I will argue that success would really be seeing this amount of money and obligation either staying rather steady or perhaps even going down. And I say that because once you demonstrate the value that the International Space Station as a national laboratory provides, you should, in fact, be creating an opportunity for folks to want to access that lab without having to incentivize them as heavily with financial resources. But I still say we're a little far off on that. However, with that said, CASIS has also generated over $2 million in the non-NASA funds. So this is money that has not come from the federal government through NASA in that $15 million annual allocation, but rather has been generated through our partnerships and our leveraging opportunities that we have formed mostly within the last 9 months of business. A lot of these have strings attached, if you will, where there's a targeted flight opportunity or there's a real sense of bringing home any of that value, again, whether perceived tangibly or intangibly, to a certain market area or to a certain interest that this partnership is vested in. But again, we're seeding the opportunity. This is really the first time that we've had traction and sort of being able to gain an interest in commercial utilization. So we see this as a very successful milestone and metric. Just to kind of highlight some of our commercial partnerships that have translated both into these projects that I mentioned as well as the funding opportunities, I've listed some here. With the Boston Museum of Science representing our opportunity to aggressively conduct our outreach programs. Research and academic institutions such as MD Anderson and the Baylor College of Medicine, as well as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's interesting, we have sort of a dual relationship with MIT. One is, as I've mentioned, in this purely academic sense where we're able to collaborate with them to generate ideas that have tech transfer possibilities. But I would argue equally important is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has an industrial liaison program. And it represents 250 for-profit business organizations who have formed a rather large U.S. and international collaborative, and basically gives CASIS access almost overnight to all these entities to engage, partner, and hopefully create relationships and business deals at the end of the day. Boeing is quite clearly a large partner of ours. We have been continuing to foster and develop and understand what our relationship should be. Boeing being the largest contractor, if you will, with respect to maintaining, operating, and sustaining the International Space Station. We see both of us as having value added with respect to our partnership and relationship. If CASIS is successful in its mission and is able to firmly demonstrate utilization of the International Space Station, that should then translate into an extension of ISS, which obviously is a revenue-generating opportunity for Boeing. We've signed several flight projects that are both in development as well as already manifested for flight. A few of these here include Procter & Gamble and Merck, who I'm proud to say started their research in antibodies and other types of drug formularies quite a number of years ago during the shuttle period, but will be flying with us a second time in this upcoming increment. Cobra Puma Golf, and some of you may find that rather interesting, but here is a great example of a traditional for-profit U.S. company. And you really need to scratch your head to wonder what on earth do they need to do on space. Well, quite frankly, they see this from two perspectives. And I will not hide the fact that one of those is clearly their own marketing opportunities. To be the first in their industry to say that they have space-age materials in their products, or that they have demonstrated or tested their products in space, or what have you, is certainly brand generating, and it is something that has a very tangible value to any company to be the first in their industry. But more importantly, very early on, some very smart people within the Cobra Puma research and development arm recognized that there's a wonderful opportunity for doing some very sophisticated materials exposure research and materials hardening research within the external environment in the vacuum of space. And so we have been working a number of months with Cobra Puma to actually develop a rather unique series of experiments that will be conducted over next year and into 2015. And we're hoping, as well as they are, that there will be product application that's derived from that. Novartis is another great partner of ours. They have gone off and really, in my opinion, taken a risk to be a leader within their industry, to be sort of the pioneer with understanding a commercial rodent model in the development of pharmaceutical drugs that are targeted for the market. More specifically, what they are looking at is understanding whether or not a quick-to-fail drug model can be developed with respect to some of the well-known elements of microgravity that have significant impact and mimic exacerbation of disease states as a result of exposure to microgravity. One of those is in bone loss. It's very well studied and very well understood in the astronaut crew. The other is in muscle wasting. There are several other physiological consequences, such as neurodegenerative deficits that sort of mimic disease states. But what they're looking at is a way that they can shorten their R&D portfolio, which is typically 10 to 15 years to market after the result of FDA trial, and hundreds of millions of dollars to get one drug onto the market. And so if they're able to take a formulary or very early on a preliminary drug and test it in an environment where these disease states are exacerbated and or accelerated, and actually generate some sound results, they will have saved several years and several millions of dollars in making a decision on whether they continue to go forward with that drug development or cut their losses at the site. And then finally, we have memorandums of agreement in place with and or are developing with our other government agency partners. And I mentioned some of these in the past, NIH and NOAA, USDA. These are well-known government, federal funding agencies for both fundamental as well as applied research. But others, such as the DoD and the Navy Research Laboratory, these represent departments within large agencies who have a very pointed interest in utilizing the International Space Station for research and technology development. And quite frankly, they exceed outside of the life sciences biotech realm. But I would just say that with CASIS coming online, this concept of the National Lab Office actually started within NASA as these congressional authorizations were being contemplated and passed into law. And so this represents sort of a comprehensive perspective of the commercial entities who have taken advantage of using the International Space Station, both during the national laboratory days while under the NASA oversight, and then as they either translated or transferred into CASIS, or CASIS developed new partnerships moving forward. And so why is commercial utilization so important? I think I've hit on this a little bit, and to be as politically correct as I can, quite frankly, it achieves the original intent of the International Space Station. Again, this was built to be a pioneering outpost to help us understand how we can survive for a long period of time in an environment which, from an evolutionary biology perspective, is one that is extremely unique and that no organism has really ever been exposed to for such a period of time. It helps us understand how we can continue to explore and possibly settle on other planetary bodies as we move forward into the future. But that's really NASA's driven mission. And so the other part of that was what else is the ISS capable of doing? Are there impacts that can be understood and realized and put into place where benefit and value can be generated for terrestrial value? And so can we generate a direct impact on US citizens? And can we emphasize this as a return on investment for the $100 billion that were expended to create this pioneering outpost, which actually may have terrestrial impact as well? But at the end of the day, and to be quite frank, commercial utilization is extremely important because the extension of the ISS is dependent on it. And we all know, and we all firmly believe, particularly among the group that we're here with today, that for us to be able to demonstrate this as a commercial application and have benefit, by 2020, we'll not be able to recognize that. However, these funding decisions and the decision to extend past 2020, hopefully at least into 2028, are decisions that will be made as early as next year. And so we really need to focus on that commercial entity and attracting those organizations, as well as the academic institutions that focus on tech transfer to the marketplace as being key in establishing partnerships who are driven towards utilization. So how can this be realized? And I think I might be coming up a little short on time, so let me try to speed through this a little bit. Quite frankly, we still have to demonstrate that the fundamental questions regarding microgravity can be answered. NASA has put a lot of focus and emphasis on understanding the problems that they face and how they can develop solutions to that to mitigate spaceflight issues. But I would argue that there are a lot of other research questions that have not been asked as a result of that and are certainly compelling and should be. And there are fundamental questions that need to be asked and answered first before we can just demonstrate that there is an applied opportunity here going forward. So in order to do that, we need to be able to create opportunities that will really get people to think from their traditional mechanisms and directions to really trying something new and novel. And so we do have to continue with our seed funding efforts. We have to incentivize financially. We have to create partnerships and grant challenges. We have to conduct significant outreach. We have to familiarize the research community at large with CASIS, help them understand what our business model is, and help them to really understand that we're not a fundamental research government funding agency, but rather someone who's been challenged with a daunting task of, in a very short amount of time and with a very short amount of money, to demonstrate that there is a commercial capability here. But at the same time, we also need to knock down those barriers, and those are both costs and application. And so we do need to streamline our processes. We need to work with NASA very, very carefully and very closely in order to preserve the safety and integrity issues that they face, but at the same time, becoming more streamlined with what the commercial research environment and portfolio looks like. And that's a lot shorter time frame from concept to market and a lot lower cost. And so this is the paradigm shift in how we conduct space business. And I really believe that this is how we'll have to be as we move forward in this competitive commercial market. It's not your father's NASA. This is a paradigm shift. When we look at SpaceX, we look at Orbital, we look at the other commercial entities who have an interest in space flight, it's completely different from what NASA has done in the past, where it was 100% funded. ISS construction is complete. It's open for business. We now need to focus on utilization. And a lot of that hinges on how we incentivize and expedite entities to ISS, hopefully for the production of products or IP that can go to the commercial market. And I will kind of gloss over this last slide to say, but how are we doing it right now? I will argue that we are still on a very steep learning curve. This is something that really hasn't been done in the past, and so we have had starts and stops. We've tried certain models, abandoned those, and tried others. But at the end of the day, we have probably two mechanisms that are fundamental to us. And one is the traditional business-to-business development model, and that is really, we have a product, and we're going into a marketplace after we've done our analysis to understand that we have a capability that they may be interested in. Can we create an opportunity? And then also through our solicited and unsolicited proposal opportunities, where again, sort of a mimic of the past, where we are putting out opportunities for research, seeding them and investing in them as we can. And then sort of the non-traditional ways, where we're looking at geographic regions where within these clusters, there are academic institutions with emphasis on tech transfer. There's an innovative research and development industry, and there are funding sources through partnerships, investment, and quite frankly, philanthropy, all residing in one ecosystem that we can capitalize on and take advantage of creating opportunities for use of the ISS for research. And so, in summary, ISS quite arguably is one of humankind's greatest technological achievements. It is open for business. However, its value must be recognized. And that is a challenge that CASIS has right now. This is why we are here today. We want to make sure that we understand what barriers and constraints are that we may not have perceived. We also want to be able to help deliver our message and outreach. And so ISPCS and the community that's involved in this is very important to us. NASA, as well as the federal government, has provided a grand opportunity to us for use of the ISS. The subsidies are just really incomprehensible, and we really want to take advantage of that. But there are incentives that are still necessary that we need to put in place in order to attract a new customer base, one that's really never contemplated such a pioneering effort in the past. And so CASIS is taking the lead in creating these utilization opportunities within very specific and targeted ecosystems. We recognize that we're resource burdened or resource restricted, which is probably a better way to say it. And so we're targeting what we have very pointedly and very specifically to be successful as we can. But our partners are very critical to the success of both CASIS as well as the ISS National Laboratory. And I would argue that a continued development of partnerships where we can leverage expertise as well as other financial resources will be absolutely important as we move forward into the future. And so with that, I will wrap that up and say thank you very much for your attention today.
A few questions. We have a few questions, although I have to congratulate you, Duane. It's really interesting as the questions have been coming in, you've been answering them with your talk almost. But I do have a few questions that people want to ask. And here's the burning question of the day. You showed the slide. How did Disney Pixar utilize the ISS?
Okay, so this was a project opportunity that started with the NASA National Lab Office, and really, it was one that was more of an informal outreach opportunity. I think they did something with Buzz Lightyear at some point in time. So, but we'll take credit for it. They're commercial.
Outstanding. Now, is CASIS involved in PR for any ISS products?
Public relations,
advertising, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that weaves into our outreach and advocacy role. I mean, we have a marketing and communications department with a budget that's fairly substantive, so yes.
Okay, in terms of the space station and its resources, both facility and crew time being very constrained, what percentage of the available time is currently being used and what percentage is available for CASIS to book? So
I will try to answer that as concisely as I can. Right now, we have not exceeded our 50% capacity. And I will argue that because neither NASA nor CASIS want to define what that means. But also, you have to kind of keep in mind that right now, increment 37 started with the delivery of the orbital vehicle, I think, to ISS. So this is the first increment where we've had a substantial number of our payloads actually be delivered to ISS. So within our first 2 years, we were going through the same processes of creating the opportunities and going through the manifesting and payload development processes. And so now we're sorting and sort of at the point where we're bearing our fruit. So up until now, we have been below that utilization threshold. But we hope to have that as being a problem in the future.
Okay, so constrained by transportation more than anything else.
It's a bottleneck. And I mean, look, our laboratory is not easy to get to.
Okay. There's an opportunity out there, folks. Have you considered outreach to several of the very rich, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, to create a fund for unique ISS research ideas that individuals or organizations could apply to?
The answer is yes, and we have had small successes to date. It is not an easy thing to do to go stand in front of Bill Gates. So you really have to be able to demonstrate that you have a tangible product here, that you have something that is of value. And think of Bill Gates, for example. I mean, they are a philanthropic institution. So to take something that's hard to even wrap your arms around because you can't touch it or see it and translate that into something that will pull on the heartstrings of an organization like that is a very hard thing to do. But yes, we are trying to develop opportunities within several of these types of organizations where, quite frankly, we're looking for partnering from financial perspectives as well as other opportunities.
Okay, so the clock's counted down to 1 minute to go. What's the simple non-techie value proposition for CASIS that we can use to talk to the medical and energy sectors? 50 seconds.
Okay, and again, if you were approaching me, and if you had or didn't have any sort of experience in spaceflight in the past, to be able to say to someone, your idea can be flown on the International Space Station and hopefully develop a product because you're that passionate about it, and by the way, I can get you there for free, that's a pretty compelling value proposition.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's thank Duane for being here. And
thank you.
Yes.